This is the seminal statement. It's one of several of Robert Greenleaf. So when you read this, those served grow as persons. That's a big, big element of this. While being served, you become healthier, wiser, freer. What else would you want? More autonomous. That's everything that this nation would like to emulate. That's where the Pilgrims came from, to do just that. And what's the effect on the least privileged? In the actions that we take, does it indirectly put them down? Does it not hurt them? Or does it lift them up? And then there's a statement beyond this. As a result of your example of doing this is awfully early in the morning to be talking to me. As a result of doing this, do other people follow your example? That is powerful. And what would you have for your life? And by others, you know, it's your family, your children, your grandchildren, nieces, nephews, and then all the people you work with, people you associate with in the community. So that's what this is about. Tom, you want to make any other statements on this?
One of the interesting things as we look at Greenleaf today, why he's so important, is that one, he's saying these things back in the 1970s, and still today, one of the major concerns of every organization is how do we get our employees engaged in the work? How do we get our employees and members of our institutions to take ownership and responsibility for the work that's being done? And if you can't get people's hearts, forget about their hands. If you can't get people's minds engaged in the ideas that you want to spread throughout the organization, forget about growth for the organization. It's difficult, however. I had a gentleman who came up to me, he's about my same age because of our same hair color, and he said, you know, Tom, when we were growing up, what did we want to be when we grew up? We wanted to become the boss. Now I become the boss, you tell me I have to be a servant. So I go and I tell people, listen, I'm here to serve you. They say, no, you're the boss. Tell us what to do. We got a lot of work to do. So one of the things that Greenleaf was very important about is that one of the major tasks of all leadership is maturity. It's helping people to grow up and take responsibility for their own lives and the lives of others in the ways in which he served them. Finally, Max Dupre gives a marvelous definition of servant leadership, which I'm sure is in all of your job descriptions. Servant leadership is a privilege of being involved in the messiest parts of other people's lives.
Yeah.
This is not for the faint of heart. When you start to recognize in terms of the consequences of our activities and the impact that we have in the lives of other people, I don't know how do you say this anything clearer, and this is why we're trying to develop leadership. If you have a poor supervisor, you probably have a poor life. It's very difficult when we have responsibility in the lives of other people. If we are not treating them well, helping people to grow, empowering them, this affects people way beyond the workday. So this was the prophetic work that he was doing, and at the time that he's writing this, he's the vice president of AT&T Corporation, the largest corporation in the world, writing about what should take place in leadership. And so he's writing these. I think these essays are written for us now in the 21st century.
So, it's about listening. It's about empathy. These are the principles as espoused by one of the substantive writers focused just on Greenleaf's servant leadership. Healing, awareness, persuasion, conceptualization. You know, listening is probably one of the more profound things that we do. Listening not so you can be heard, but listening so that you can understand. Have you ever had some silly transactions where you assumed something of what somebody else was representing, immediately clicked out of what they were saying and went into your own thinking? Now, you weren't saying anything, but your own thinking, your wheels were turning. It's pretty natural in one sense. It's very natural. But listening to understand, you have no idea what that person might be going through. I remember in a class, this was a high school class, riveting situation. And the brightest young lady in the class, this is a tough story, but you won't forget it. And that's why I'm telling you. And it's a long time ago. And they had their assignments, and I would call up each one of the parents in this class and say how well their children were doing. I called this one home with this mother of this child, and she got mad at me. And she went hysterical. She said, I'm going to talk to the principal. And I'm just complimenting her on her daughter. And so I said, go ahead and talk to the principal. So I talked to the principal beforehand. She never did. And then the young lady in the class got up and said, Mr. Cooper, you know, some of us have a lot of other things going on in our life. Well, okay, that sounds reasonable. Yeah, I know you're in a tough situation. Turns out her mother was a teacher. Well, about a year later, I'm involved with an organization in the city that is involved with young ladies who are pregnant and being abused at home while being pregnant. And they take them into their place. And guess who was there? I never really listened. What an ass I was, quite frankly, in expecting her to do something with what was going on at home. At home was a teacher, K through 12. Had a man in her house that didn't belong there. I was not listening. Foresight. Stewardship. Commitment to the growth of people, community. Those last two you will not find in any leadership style in the world. Those two. The rest of these, in some form, you will find in other areas. Tom, you want to comment on this? Here's a practical application. What's the difference between servant leadership and other things?
Many of us have grown up in institutions where leadership was in a hierarchical model. I love this language. Instead of hierarchies of leadership, we need plazas of leadership throughout our organization. And I think one of the interesting things is as we begin to recognize that we are going through a shift within our society today in terms of from kind of information to consciousness, certainly in terms of our understandings of each other. This is what's happening through servant leadership. So let's look number 4, views accountability as assigning blame. But talking to people in terms of accountability, oftentimes it's always measured in rewards and punishment. In servant leadership, views accountability as creating a safe environment from learning from experience. Sitting down and asking people about the work that they're doing, helping them to close the gap between what they've done and what they hope they're able to do. So that one of the things that Peter Senge had talked about is how do we become learning organizations? Is everybody in an organization having an opportunity to learn from their experience? And therefore, a leader needs to be a teacher. Number 8, develops personal power base, uses perks and titles to signal who has power. There's a great difference. It's really interesting in terms of Google Informatics. From 1970 to 2004, it doesn't move on the term servant leadership at all. From what Greenleaf had to say until 2004, it's just flatline. And then in 2004, it begins to move up just incrementally, and then 2008, it just jumps. Now, why is it that servant leadership jumps in terms of recognition and finds its way into the literature in 2008? Because clearly we now all understand the difference between self-serving leadership and servant leadership. And when I go into an organization because I want power, prestige, and privilege, I'm going there in a self-serving manner. Or whether I go to the organization because I want to serve. I'm coming to this organization because I want other people to be able to grow and to develop. Now it's rather interesting, I can just mention the word Mother Teresa, and here I just mentioned the word of a woman who's been dead for 14 years. They don't give out vitals on nuns, but would you imagine? Do you think that she was 5 foot? Do you think that Mother Teresa was even 100 pounds? So here's somebody under 5 foot, under 100 pounds, and what did she own? 2 dresses. And 14 years after her death, we're all talking about her. Why? Because of her service. So she was asked after age 80, she was in the hospital for exhaustion. Wouldn't it be wonderful to be 80 and be exhausted? And she comes out of the hospital and people asked her, "Mother, what's your greatest problem?" And she said, "Parking spaces." Parking spaces? Parking spaces. I send the sisters that get their degrees in medicine and nursing, they come back, they all want their own parking space. So I have to send them to the house of the dying to get them straightened around to understand why they first came here in the first place. So this is what's really amazing, and that's what Greenleaf paid attention to. And as we look in terms of our own culture today, when people say, who's a servant leader? Well, does the name Nelson Mandela strike a chord? Pope Francis. And not by the things that they said in the great speeches, but the way in which they choose to live by being engaged with people who live on the margins. And this really becomes significant and important. And then finally, number 11, let's look at that focus on fast action. How do we get things done faster, faster, faster? Focuses on gaining understanding, input, and buy-in from all parties. Understand that faster is often slower. At Starbucks, the person who's going to sweep the floor gets the chance to choose the broom. The understanding of subsidiarity. The person who's going to be most affected by the decision has input to the decision. That's their leadership.
Excellent. We've got about 3 or 4 minutes more, and then we're going to your questions and answers. Then we're going to take a break, and then we're going to start up the regular session. So, Tom and Dick, tell some stories. Stories are usually better remembered. I'll tell you a story about someone that's a friend. I'm in their house, and I'm always talking about K through 12 education. And sitting there is a senior in high school, very smart person. And I'm talking about what's going on in high schools. And I'm talking about drugs in high schools, difference between character education and non-character education schools. And the dad, all of a sudden, just explodes. I don't want to hear that in this house. Not in this house. This is my house. Stop it. I don't want to hear it. I mean, what do you do in that situation? What do you do? Goes to the subject of today. I said, I apologize, in a very low tone voice. I apologize. And he sat there. He looked at me. And he didn't know what to do. And I said nothing. Nobody in the room said anything. And then he said, okay. Then I waited for some more silence. The silence in this situation was long, from my perspective. But I gave it some time and space. And then I said, do you accept my apology? And this is a big man. And he's used to being in charge. He didn't know what to do. He was astounded on his face. And there, his daughter is sitting next to him. And he says, and then his whole body kind of changed. The body language changed. He said, well, yeah, I guess so. And it completely changed the conversation, the transaction. We were done and it was behind us. Now, I meant that sincerely. It wasn't just some words. I truly meant what I said. And I asked sincerely whether he'd accept it or not. Give you another situation, similar. A boss and a subordinate. They are having shouting matches in their office over some nitty-gritty position on something. And I hear about this. I'm kind of one of a number of people mentoring this executive level guy. And then it turns out that the executive level guy was really wrong. They had been talking about this for months. He was wrong. And I went into his office and I asked him about this, and he said, yeah, I'm wrong. I said, have you ever apologized to him? He kind of stopped. Well, I'll do that. I said, now if you really want to grow psychologically, emotionally, and move further down the line, ask him if he would forgive you. Once he says yes, and he will say yes. Almost everybody does if you're sincere. And that takes care of a lot of stuff. After he's done that, take your time and ask him if he forgives you. And you know what the boss said? He thought about it, he thought about it. He said, Dick, I'm not there yet. So everybody's in a different place. But humility is powerful stuff if it's legitimate. There's humility that's talked about. Humility that isn't really sincere. And frequently we know the difference, but not always. But if it comes from the heart, from the soul, that humility just bonds, lifts everything up. And that's the subject of today. Tom? A story.
If one's going to be humble, one must have the courage to be publicly vulnerable. And for all of us, that's very difficult to do. I'm working with a manufacturing group in La Crosse right now, and what they specifically wanted to learn about is servant leadership in manufacturing. So it's a group of gentlemen, and one of the activities now that we've gotten to toward the end of the course is to write down all the names of the people that they supervise, and then what is the quality in that person that they would miss if that person wasn't there. And then I asked them, would you be willing to sit down and share this with your people? A gentleman came back. He's in tears. He said, I've been working here for 30 years, and I never allowed myself to acknowledge how deeply I felt about the guys I work with. And I sat down with them all individually, and many of us have worked from anywhere from 15 to 30 years together, and I told them what I would miss if they weren't here, how they have contributed to my life and to our work. And even some of the guys began to cry. We were kind of embarrassed because we didn't know what to do with the emotion. He said, it's not only changed our relationship, it's changed the way in which we work together. And he came back and he said, I thought that it would only last for a week or so. It's getting stronger. We're showing each other how much we appreciate each other. And then he said this, even the guys who are complainers are doing it in a positive way. Do we, in our work, in our leadership, have the courage to be publicly vulnerable? Are we willing to tell people what we think of them and how much we appreciate them? That's an act of humility. Humility comes from the Latin word humus, which means soil. What kind of soil is humus? Rich soil. Humility enriches our lives and enriches all of our relationships.
Questions and answers. Questions, please.
I want to just kind of address Tom. You, when we came to the slide about the traditional boss and the servant leader boss, the one quality that you really talked about was focus on fast action and then focus on deeper understanding, etc.
Right.
In today's marketplace, it seems like there's a demand to be more agile, to make changes quickly, because of the competitive marketplace. How do you address both of those?
In this way, you want to be mindful, thoughtful, reflective before making decisions, so that your decisions are thoughtful rather than reactive. And I think that so oftentimes now, because of the marketplace, people are looking for more income streams, how are we going to pick up more business, and then all of a sudden we're kind of flying off in this direction and it hasn't been well thought of. Or in terms of we're going to begin an initiative, are we asking ourselves the question, what are the first and second degrees of consequences of this decision? Are we going to be able to sustain this initiative? And how many things do we begin, and then all of a sudden they kind of take off with a flare and then they drop, and then we're on to something else. And when that happens, we create levels of cynicism, I believe. And so how is it that we engage with each other in the thoughtful conversation? And it's very difficult today, not only in the marketplace, but publicly, because we have gotten into a very bad habit. And the very bad habit is this: we start to argue with each other before we understand each other. So when we come together, how is it that we seek levels of understanding in terms of who's going to do this work, who's going to be responsible for this work, who's going to move this work forward, what do you need in order to do that? Rather than say, just do it, we got to move on.
And how does this fit our mission and purpose and the objectives and goals of the organization? Or is it just activity?
I'll ask a question. Dick, why do you stay involved in this work? You've been doing this for 50 years. You've been successful in the work that you have done in your company organization. You could very much now go and sit on the sidelines, but you're still active and engaged.
I could go sailing too. It is very, very rich work. I don't know that I'm there for that. That's what I've experienced. But it is just, for me, this is for me, it is the right thing to do. It moves societies, it moves companies, it moves institutions. And I've been on this journey since I'm early 20s. And so the company is the company. It's doing what it's doing. The ethos is good. That's important for me. But now how can I use what I've learned to share with others? And do I have the foresight to see how this could work? So in Wisconsin, you know, we've got 2,300 people that are in this queue with no 501c3, no checkbook, and we have evolving institutions. It's all very natural. I call it rolling boulders down the mountain. And who would want to not roll boulders down the mountain if you're apparently doing something that's worthwhile? That's a big, long answer.
A leader must have the ability to know the unknowable and to foresee the unforeseeable. So where does that come from? That comes from an inner knowing. That comes from nurturing intuition and imagination. That means in terms of paying attention to our deepest thoughts. Withdrawing from a situation. When's the last time that we've given a leader permission to go on retreat? Just to think and to reflect. This last week at Viterbo, we just sponsored a national conference on water ethics. I think California gives us a pretty good example as to what we might be doing on water. And we had women from the Anishinaabe tribe come down, the Ojibwe, who are the water walkers, the keeper of the water. One of the elders said, if we do not care for our water now, in 2013, water will be as precious as gold. That kind of what you pay attention to the signs of the times and begin to extrapolate and wonder, where is it that we are moving? And that, I think, is the role of a leader. Greenleaf said this: the inability or unwillingness of a leader to exercise foresight can be considered a moral failure. So it's that nurturing that inner life through reflection, conversation, but then projecting out as to where we need to go.
So I wonder if you could say a little bit more about what you think builds community.
Building community, Tom, you can comment, but we only have a minute for this. Okay? I think serving each other, having leaders with foresight. The leaders with foresight is huge, huge. But if you have foresight, you can follow. If the heart is right, you'll follow, and the richness will return. A good model, I'm not advocating this, but I just visited Singapore. Man just died. His heart was in the right place for 50 years. They have an extraordinary accomplishment in the sense of inclusiveness, all the things that environment, business performance, education, they have it all. But there was a man whose heart was in the right place, and he had foresight. All you need is one or two of those in an institution or a community, and that community is going a different place.
I think that's really basic today, and I think it's the deep hunger of all of us is to belong to a community, to know who and whose we are. Mother Teresa was asked by a young person, Mother, how do you change the world? She said, go home and love your family. That's where it starts. And secondly, friendship. Friendship is really powerful. Do you have a good friend at work? The Gallup organization has researched employee engagement for 50 years. what's the number one characteristic of those people who are most engaged at work? If you have a good friend at work. So the understanding of becoming friends with each other, and then we can go on and we can talk about how this is social capital, and if we have social capital, we have both bonding and bridging capital, how that begins to build relationships. But I think family and friendships have been way undervalued. And we need to reclaim this. So that's where community starts and then spreads out.